Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Michael Romano had built his life like a fortress, methodical, deliberate, unbreachable. At 42, he owned 3 successful auto repair shops across the county, each one a testament to his relentless work ethic and sharp business mind. His calloused hands told the story of a man who started from nothing, working 16-hour days in his father's cramped garage until he saved enough to buy his first shop at 25. The Romano name meant something in Millbrook County. When people needed their cars fixed, they came to Mike. When they needed a loan to get back on their feet, Mike's shops offered payment plans that kept families mobile. He was the kind of man who remembered every customer's name and their children's birthdays. His marriage to Linda Phillips had been the crown jewel of his carefully constructed life. She was the daughter of Millbrook's former mayor, a stunning blonde with a degree in education and aspirations of becoming a principal. They'd met at a charity auction 8 years ago, where Mike had successfully bid on a weekend getaway just to have an excuse to talk to her. "You know that package is for the Catskills, not Hawaii," Linda had teased him that night, her green eyes sparkling with amusement. "Good thing I like mountains," Mike had replied, and 6 months later, he proposed to her on that very same mountaintop. Their children, Emma and David, were 7 and 5 respectively, bright kids who inherited Linda's quick wit and Mike's stubborn determination. Emma was already showing signs of mechanical aptitude, often found in Mike's garage, asking endless questions about engines. David was more artistic, spending hours drawing elaborate superhero stories that Linda proudly displayed on their refrigerator. Mike's world was ordered, predictable, and exactly as he designed it. Every morning, he kissed Linda goodbye at 7:15, dropped the kids at Millbrook Elementary by 7:45, and arrived at his main shop by 8 sharp. Every evening, he was home by 6 for dinner, homework help, and bedtime stories. But perfection, Mike had learned from years of fixing broken-down cars, was often just an illusion hiding deeper problems. The first crack in his fortress appeared 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Linda had started working late at the school, claiming the principal had given her additional administrative duties. She'd come home flushed and distracted, her usual chatter about her day replaced by vague mentions of paperwork and meetings. Mike noticed because he noticed everything. It was the same attention to detail that helped him diagnose a faulty transmission from the sound of an engine that now picked up on his wife's changing patterns. "Long day?" he'd ask, and Linda would nod, already reaching for her phone to check messages. "Mrs. Henderson's retirement party planning is more complicated than I thought," she'd reply, but her eyes never quite met his. Mike Romano had survived his childhood in Millbrook's rougher neighborhoods by learning to read people. His father, Antonio Romano, had been a hard man who taught him that trust was earned through actions, not words. "People show you who they are, Michael," Antonio would say while they worked side by side in the garage. "You just have to pay attention." Now, watching Linda's behavior shift like a car pulling to one side, Mike paid attention. The second crack appeared when he found a receipt in Linda's purse while looking for a lip balm to help Emma with a scraped knee. Dinner at Romano's, Millbrook's upscale Italian restaurant, for 2 people, charged to Linda's credit card on a Tuesday evening when she claimed to be at a faculty meeting. Mike held the receipt for a long moment, his mind automatically calculating the timeline. Tuesday was 3 weeks ago, the same day he'd taken Emma to her piano lesson and David to soccer practice. Linda had kissed him goodbye that morning, complaining about how boring the faculty meeting would be. He carefully placed the receipt back where he'd found it and gave Emma the lip balm. But something fundamental shifted in Michael Romano that day. The fortress walls didn't crumble, they hardened. By Thanksgiving week, Mike had compiled a mental catalog of inconsistencies. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. New lingerie hidden in the back of her drawer. A different perfume that seemed to linger in her hair on certain evenings. He'd also started paying closer attention to Linda's family dynamics. Patricia Phillips, Linda's mother, had always treated Mike with polite distance. She was a woman who believed her daughter had married beneath her station, despite Mike's success. Patricia made subtle comments about blue-collar limitations and frequently mentioned successful men from her social circle, doctors, lawyers, politicians, in pointed conversations. Linda could have had anyone, Patricia had said just last week while they planned Thanksgiving dinner. She has such refined tastes. At the time, Mike had assumed it was just Patricia's usual passive-aggressive needling. Now, he wondered if there was more intention behind her words. The third and final crack came on Thanksgiving morning itself. Linda was unusually nervous, checking her appearance multiple times and suggesting they arrive at her mother's house later than planned. "Maybe we should go to your shop first," she'd suggested. "Check on things." Mike's shops were closed for Thanksgiving, and Linda knew that. She'd never shown interest in his work before, never suggested visiting the shops on a holiday. "Everything's fine at the shops," Mike replied, watching her carefully. "Why would we need to check on anything?" Linda's laugh was too bright, too quick. "Just thought you might want to, make sure everything's locked up properly." Mike Romano had spent his entire adult life building something solid, something real. He believed in the foundation of his marriage the way he believed in well-engineered machinery. With proper maintenance and attention, it would run smoothly for decades. But as they loaded the kids into the car for the short drive to Patricia Phillips' house, Mike realized he'd been servicing a machine that was already broken. The question wasn't whether Linda was betraying him. It was how long the betrayal had been going on and who else was involved. The Romano family motto, passed down from his grandfather who'd immigrated from Sicily, was simple. Respect is earned, loyalty is given, and betrayal is never forgotten. As Mike pulled into Patricia's driveway, seeing the familiar cars already parked there, he made a silent promise to himself. Whatever he discovered today would be handled with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else in his life. Michael Romano was about to learn that some machines, once broken, could never be repaired, but they could be completely dismantled. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The Phillips family home stood like a monument to old money and older grudges. Patricia Phillips had inherited the colonial-style house from her parents, and she maintained it with the same rigid precision she applied to her social standing. Every shrub was perfectly manicured, every piece of furniture carefully selected to convey both comfort and superiority. Mike carried the sweet potato casserole Linda had prepared while she herded Emma and David toward the front door. The children were excited, chattering about seeing their cousins and playing in Grandma Patricia's spacious backyard. "Remember, best behavior," Linda whispered to the kids, but Mike noticed she seemed to be reminding herself as much as them. Patricia Phillips answered the door wearing her traditional Thanksgiving outfit, a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Her steel-gray hair was set in perfect waves, and her makeup was applied with the precision of a woman who'd never been seen in public without it. But when Patricia's eyes landed on Mike, something shifted in her expression. The polite smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. "Michael," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You're here." It was an odd greeting, considering they confirmed their arrival time just yesterday. Mike felt the first stirring of genuine alarm in his chest. "Of course we're here," Linda said quickly, stepping forward. "Why wouldn't we be?" Patricia's eyes flickered between Linda and Mike, and in that moment, Mike saw the truth written across her face as clearly as a diagnostic code on a computer screen. Patricia knew something. More than that, Patricia was part of something. "I just thought." "Well, perhaps you might have decided to spend the holiday at home this year," Patricia said, but her words lacked conviction. Mike stepped forward, still carrying the casserole, and extended his warmest smile. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Patricia. Family's everything, right?" The word family hit its mark. Patricia actually flinched. "Of course," she said, stepping aside to let them in. "Everyone's in the dining room." As they moved through the house, Mike's mind raced through possibilities. The guest list for Patricia's Thanksgiving was always the same. Linda's younger brother Tommy and his wife Rebecca, along with their 2 kids. Patricia's sister Margaret and her husband George. And this year, they'd mentioned that Rebecca's brother would be joining them. Rebecca's brother. Mike had never met the man, but Linda had mentioned him several times recently. Kyle Morrison, recently divorced, recently moved back to Millbrook, recently hired as the new athletic director of the high school where Linda worked. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a well-oiled engine. Mike heard the laughter before he saw the dining room. Emma and David immediately ran toward their cousins, but Mike paused in the doorway, taking in the scene with newfound clarity. The dining table was set for the usual number of people, but there was an intimacy to the gathering that felt exclusive rather than welcoming. Tommy was deep in conversation with a tall, athletic man Mike didn't recognize. Kyle Morrison, no doubt. Rebecca was setting out appetizers while Margaret and George occupied their usual spots near the fireplace. And there, in the center of it all, was Linda. She was laughing at something Kyle had said, her hand resting casually on his arm in a gesture that spoke of familiarity, of shared secrets, of a comfort level that took time to develop. Mike watched his wife touch another man with the same casual intimacy she'd once reserved for him, and felt something cold and calculating settle in his chest. "Mike," Tommy called out, finally noticing their arrival. "Come meet Kyle." "Kyle, this is Linda's husband, Michael." Kyle Morrison turned, and Mike found himself face to face with everything he wasn't. Where Mike was solid and weathered from years of physical work, Kyle was lean and polished. Where Mike's hands showed the honest calluses of manual labor, Kyle's were soft and manicured. Where Mike dressed practically, Kyle wore the kind of casual elegance that came from a lifetime of privilege. "Michael," Kyle said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've heard so much about you." Mike shook the offered hand, noting Kyle's firm grip and the way he held eye contact just a beat too long. The handshake of a man trying to establish dominance. "Funny," Mike replied, his own smile equally practiced. "Linda's barely mentioned you at all." It was a small lie, but it hit its target. Kyle's confidence flickered for just a moment, and Linda quickly stepped in to smooth over the awkwardness. "I mentioned Kyle was starting at the school," she said, but her voice was too bright, too defensive. "Right," Mike said. "The athletic director position. That's quite a step up from. Remind me, what were you doing before?" Kyle's jaw tightened slightly. "I was coaching college football in California. Division II level. And you gave that up to come back to Millbrook?" Mike pressed, his tone conversational but pointed. "Must have been quite an opportunity here." "Family reasons," Kyle said tersely. Mike nodded thoughtfully. "Family's important. Speaking of which, where should I put this casserole?" Linda practically leaped at the chance to escape the conversation. "I'll show you to the kitchen." As they walked away, Mike caught Patricia watching them with barely concealed anxiety. The woman was practically vibrating with nervous energy, and Mike filed that observation away for later use. In the kitchen, Linda busied herself with rearranging dishes that were already perfectly arranged. "You don't have to interrogate him," she said without looking at Mike. "Was I interrogating him? I thought I was being friendly." Linda turned to face him, and for a moment, Mike saw a flash of the woman he'd fallen in love with. Vulnerable, uncertain, maybe even regretful. "Mike, Linda, Kyle's asking about the wine selection." Patricia's voice cut through whatever Linda had been about to say. The moment passed. Linda's expression closed off, and she hurried back to the dining room, leaving Mike alone with his thoughts and a kitchen full of carefully prepared dishes. Mike Romano had always believed that knowledge was power, but information without context was just noise. Now, watching through the kitchen doorway as Linda and Kyle gravitated toward each other like magnets, he began to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. This wasn't a spontaneous affair born of sudden passion. This was planned, coordinated, with Patricia Phillips herself as an active participant. The whole family knew. They'd all been complicit in making Mike look like a fool. He thought about Emma and David, playing innocently with their cousins while the adults around them maintained an elaborate charade. He thought about all the late nights Linda had blamed on work, all the phone calls that ended when he entered the room, all the small deceptions that had led to this moment. But most of all, he thought about the look on Patricia's face when she'd opened the door. The surprise, the guilt, the clear expectation that he wouldn't be there. They'd planned for him not to come. They'd orchestrated a family gathering that was supposed to exclude him, and something had gone wrong with their plan. Mike Romano had built his life on fixing things that were broken. But standing in Patricia Phillips' kitchen, Watching his wife laugh with her lover while their children played nearby, he realized that some things weren't worth repairing. Some things deserved to be completely destroyed. The question was no longer whether to act, but how to ensure that his response would be thorough, devastating, and absolutely final. Michael Romano had never forgiven a betrayal in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. Chapter 3. The Confrontation. The tension in the Phillips house grew thicker as the afternoon progressed, like humidity before a storm. Mike positioned himself strategically throughout the gathering, observing, cataloging, building his case with the methodical precision of a master craftsman. He watched Kyle's hand linger on Linda's back as he passed behind her chair. He noticed how Patricia kept glancing nervously between him and the couple, her usual composure cracking under the weight of her deception. He saw how Tommy and Rebecca exchanged meaningful looks when they thought he wasn't watching. Most tellingly, he observed how Emma and David were being subtly excluded from certain conversations, how the adults would lower their voices or change subjects when the children approached. During dinner, Mike played his role perfectly. He complimented Patricia's cooking, engaged Tommy in conversation about his struggling landscaping business, and even shared a few amusing stories about difficult customers at his shops. To any outside observer, he was the picture of a content family man enjoying a holiday meal. But beneath the surface, Mike was conducting surveillance. "Kyle, Linda tells me you two have been working closely together on some new athletic programs," Mike said during a lull in conversation, his tone friendly and interested. Kyle nearly choked on his wine. Just the standard curriculum review stuff. "That must require a lot of evening meetings," Mike continued. "Linda's been working so late recently." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia suddenly became very interested in her mashed potatoes. Rebecca started clearing plates that were still half full. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Only Linda met Mike's eyes, and what he saw there confirmed everything he needed to know. Not guilt, defiance. She was challenging him to call her out, daring him to make a scene in front of the children. "Well," Margaret finally said, her voice overly bright, "who wants dessert?" After dinner, while the women cleaned up and the men retreated to the living room with football on television, Mike excused himself to use the bathroom. Instead, he made his way to Patricia's home office, a small room where she managed her various charitable organizations and social commitments. Patricia Phillips was a woman who documented everything. Her desk was covered with neat stacks of papers, appointment books, and correspondence. Mike quickly scanned the visible documents, looking for anything that might provide insight into the conspiracy he was uncovering. He found it in Patricia's personal calendar, lying open on her desk. 3 weeks of entries that told a damning story. L and K dinner, Romano's. L shopping for K. K house hunting, L assisting. But it was today's entry that made Mike's blood run cold. Family dinner, M traveling for work. They'd planned for him to be out of town. Someone had told Patricia that Mike would be traveling for work today, leaving Linda free to bring Kyle to family dinner as her, what? Boyfriend? Future husband? Mike photographed the calendar pages with his phone, then quickly returned to the living room where Kyle was pontificating about football strategy to a bored-looking Tommy and George. "You know," Mike said, settling into his chair, "I was just thinking about how nice it is that Linda found such a supportive colleague at work." Kyle's jaw clenched. "We all try to support each other at the school." "Of course. Though I imagine it's been an adjustment, moving back from California. Dating scene's probably pretty different in a small town like Millbrook." "I'm not really focused on dating right now," Kyle said stiffly. Mike nodded sympathetically. "Wise approach. Take time to get established. Figure out what you really want. No point in making any hasty decisions that might complicate things." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Kyle's face flushed, and he started to respond, but Linda appeared in the doorway at that moment. "Kyle, could you help me with something in the kitchen?" she asked, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. As they left the room together, Mike heard Patricia's voice from the kitchen. "You said he would be traveling. You promised me he wouldn't be here." "Plans change," Linda replied tersely. Mike excused himself and walked quietly toward the kitchen, positioning himself just outside the doorway where he could hear everything. "This is a disaster," Patricia was saying. "He knows something's wrong. I can see it in his eyes. He suspects, but he doesn't know anything for certain," Kyle said. "We just need to be careful." "Careful." Patricia's voice rose to a whisper shout. "I've been lying to that man for months. Do you have any idea how hard it's been to watch him with those children, knowing what we're planning?" "What we're planning?" Linda's voice was ice cold. "This was your idea, Mother. You're the one who said I deserved better than a grease monkey. You're the one who introduced me to Kyle." Mike felt the pieces clicking into place. This hadn't started as an affair. It had begun as a calculated campaign orchestrated by Patricia to end Linda's marriage. "I wanted better for you," Patricia said defensively. "Michael's a good man, but he's not. He's not our kind of people. Kyle comes from the right family, the right background. He can give you the life you deserve." "And the kids?" Kyle asked. "What about Emma and David?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Mike found himself holding his breath, waiting for Linda's response. "They'll adjust," Linda said finally. "Children are resilient. And honestly, they spend more time at Mike's garage than they do with me anyway. Maybe it's better if he has primary custody." The words hit Mike like a physical blow. Linda was not only planning to leave him, she was planning to abandon their children. "When?" Kyle asked. "After Christmas," Linda replied. "I'll file for divorce in January. By then, we'll have everything arranged. Kyle's house will be ready, and we can start fresh." Mike had heard enough. He walked back to the living room, his mind racing through options and consequences. Tommy and George were absorbed in the football game, unaware that their wives were in the kitchen planning the destruction of his family. 20 minutes later, Patricia appeared in the doorway with an expression of forced cheerfulness. "Michael, I'm so sorry, but I think Emma might be coming down with something. She seems a bit feverish." It was a lie, of course. Emma had been fine 5 minutes ago when he'd seen her playing with her cousins. But Patricia was providing him with an excuse to leave, probably hoping to salvage what remained of their conspiracy. Mike stood immediately. "Of course, we should get her home and comfortable." As they gathered their things, Mike caught Kyle's eye one last time. The younger man was trying to project confidence, but Mike could see the fear underneath. "Kyle," Mike said, extending his hand again. "It was really interesting to meet you. I have a feeling we'll be seeing a lot more of each other." Kyle shook his hand, and Mike gripped it just a little too tightly, just a little too long. "Looking forward to it," Kyle replied, but his voice cracked slightly. Outside in the car, with Emma and David buckled safely in the back seat, Linda finally broke the tense silence. "Mike, about today?" "Not now," Mike said quietly, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "Not in front of the kids." Linda fell silent, perhaps recognizing something dangerous in his tone. Mike Romano drove home through the darkening afternoon, his children chattering innocently in the back seat, while his wife sat beside him in guilty silence. He'd entered Patricia Phillips' house as a trusting husband and father. He was leaving as a man who discovered that his entire life was built on lies. But Mike Romano had learned long ago that knowledge was only powerful if you knew how to use it. And unlike the people who'd betrayed him, Mike had never made the mistake of underestimating his opponents. The war was just beginning, and Mike intended to win it completely. Chapter 4. The Strategy. Mike Romano's garage had always been his sanctuary, a place where problems had logical solutions and broken things could be made whole again. It was here, surrounded by the familiar smell of motor oil and the comforting weight of his tools, that he did his best thinking. It was also here, at 2 in the morning on a Friday after Thanksgiving, that Mike began planning the systematic destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. He'd waited until Linda fell asleep, then slipped out of bed and made his way to the detached garage behind their house. His main shop was equipped with security cameras and digital locks. Too much electronic surveillance for what he had in mind. But this personal workspace, where he restored classic cars as a hobby, was perfectly private. Mike spread the photographs he'd taken of Patricia's calendar across his workbench, alongside a yellow legal pad, where he'd begun documenting everything he knew. Names, dates, locations, relationships. The whole conspiracy mapped out like a complex wiring diagram. Patricia Phillips had orchestrated this betrayal from the beginning, probably starting within months of his marriage to Linda. The woman had never accepted him, never considered him worthy of her daughter, and had apparently decided to rectify what she saw as Linda's mistake. Kyle Morrison was the weapon she'd chosen. A man from the right background, the right family, with the right credentials. Someone who could provide Linda with the social status that Patricia felt she deserved. And Linda had chosen to abandon not just her marriage, but her children. That betrayal cut deeper than anything else, because Mike had truly believed, that whatever problems existed between him and his wife, they were united in their love for Emma and David. He'd been wrong about everything. Mike opened his laptop and began researching Kyle Morrison with the same thoroughness he brought to diagnosing a complex engine problem. Social media profiles revealed a man obsessed with image and status. Kyle's Instagram was full of photos from expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, and networking events with what appeared to be wealthy donors and influential politicians. Digging deeper, Mike discovered that Kyle's previous job in California had ended under unclear circumstances. The official story was that he'd requested a transfer to be closer to family, but some careful searching revealed rumors of an inappropriate relationship with a faculty member at his previous school. More interesting was Kyle's financial situation. Despite his polished appearance and expensive tastes, public records showed that he was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, student loans in default, and a history of living beyond his means that stretched back years. Kyle Morrison wasn't just Linda's lover. He was a gold digger who saw her as his ticket to financial stability. Mike photographed Kyle's financial records and added them to his growing file. Knowledge was ammunition, but he needed to be strategic about how and when to use it. Saturday morning brought the first phase of his plan into action. Linda was at the grocery store with the kids, giving Mike the privacy he needed to make some important phone calls. His first call was to Detective Rita Vasquez of the Millbrook Police Department. Rita had been a regular customer at Mike's shops for years, and they developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared stories about the challenges of small-town life. "Mike, how was your Thanksgiving?" Rita's voice was warm and familiar. "Interesting," Mike replied. "Listen, Rita, I need some advice. Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to investigate whether a school employee was involved in any kind of improper conduct, what would be the proper channels for that?" Rita's tone became more professional. "Are we talking about criminal conduct or policy violations?" "Could be either. This is all hypothetical, you understand. But say someone had reason to believe a school administrator was using their position inappropriately. Maybe developing personal relationships with subordinates, or using school resources for personal benefit. Well, hypothetically, Rita said carefully, that kind of thing would typically be reported to the school board and the state education department. If there were criminal elements involved, law enforcement would get involved. But you'd need solid evidence, not just rumors or suspicions. Of course, evidence is everything. Mike paused, then added, "Rita, you've known me for a long time. If I ever came to you with evidence of wrongdoing, you take it seriously, right?" "Mike, if you got evidence of a crime, I'll investigate it properly. You know that. I appreciate that more than you know." His second call was to his lawyer, Benjamin Cross. Ben was a sharp, ambitious attorney who'd helped Mike with his business incorporation and various legal matters over the years. More importantly, Ben was hungry for high-profile cases that could boost his reputation. "Ben, I need to talk to you about divorce law, specifically about asset protection and custody arrangements." Ben's interest was immediately piqued. "Mike, is everything okay at home? Let's just say I'm planning for various contingencies. If a man discovered his wife was planning to leave him and abandon their children, what would be his best legal strategy? Depends on the circumstances. Evidence of abandonment, infidelity, financial misconduct, all of that could impact asset division and custody. But timing is crucial. The spouse who files first often has strategic advantages. What if the husband wanted to ensure he kept primary custody of the children and the majority of marital assets? Ben was quiet for a moment. "Mike, if you're planning to divorce Linda, you need to be very careful about how you proceed. Document everything. Avoid any appearance of impropriety on your part. And whatever you do, don't give her ammunition to use against you." I understand completely. Mike's third call was the most important. His cousin Vincent Romano lived in Boston, where he ran a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate security and domestic relations cases. Vincent had learned his skills in military intelligence before transitioning to civilian work, and he owed Mike several significant favors from years past. "Vinny, I need help with a family situation." "What kind of help?" Mike outlined the basic situation, the affair, the conspiracy, the planned abandonment of his children, without providing specific names or details. "You want them destroyed," Vincent said. "It wasn't a question. I want them to face the consequences of their choices, completely and permanently." "That's what I figured. Give me the details." Mike spent 20 minutes briefing his cousin on everything he discovered. Vincent listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines and relationships. "This is going to take some coordination," Vincent said finally. "But it's doable. The key is making sure everything appears to happen naturally, as a result of their own actions rather than any intervention on your part." "That's exactly what I want. I'll need a week to set up surveillance and gather additional intelligence." "Can you maintain the status quo that long?" Mike considered the question. Linda and Kyle thought they were operating in secret, probably feeling smug about how cleverly they'd managed their affair. Patricia Phillips believed she was protecting her daughter from an unsuitable marriage. None of them suspected that Mike knew the truth. "I can give you 2 weeks. But after that, everything moves forward." "Understood." "Mike, you sure about this? Once we start down this road, there's no going back." Mike thought about Emma and David, innocently playing while the adults around them planned to tear their family apart. He thought about Linda's casual dismissal of their children's feelings, her willingness to let Mike have primary custody, as if they were pets being rehomed. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." After ending the call, Mike sat in his garage for a long time, surrounded by the tools and machines that had always made sense to him. Unlike people, machines were honest. When they broke, they showed you exactly what was wrong. When you fixed them properly, they stayed fixed. People, apparently, were more complicated. But Mike Romano had never met a problem he couldn't solve with the right tools, the right knowledge, and enough determination. By the time Linda and the kids returned from grocery shopping, Mike was in the kitchen making coffee, looking like a man without a care in the world. "How was the store?" he asked, kissing Linda's cheek with practiced affection. "Fine," she replied, but he noticed how she pulled away slightly from his touch. Mike smiled and helped Emma and David put away their groceries, playing the role of devoted husband and father while his mind calculated angles of attack and potential casualties. The war had begun, but the enemy didn't know they were already losing. Chapter 5: The Intelligence. Vincent Romano arrived in Millbrook the following Tuesday, driving an unremarkable sedan with Massachusetts plates and carrying credentials identifying him as a safety inspector for insurance companies. It was the perfect cover for someone who needed to move freely around town, asking questions and observing people without attracting attention. Mike met him at a diner outside town limits, where they could talk without risking recognition by local residents. Vincent looked exactly like what he was, a former military intelligence officer who'd learned to blend into any environment. Medium height, average build, forgettable features that most people wouldn't remember 5 minutes after meeting him. "I've been watching your targets for 3 days, Vincent said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Your wife and her boyfriend are not nearly as careful as they think they are." Mike opened the folder to find a collection of photographs and surveillance notes. Linda and Kyle at a coffee shop downtown, sitting in a corner booth with their heads close together. Kyle's hand on Linda's thigh in the parking lot behind the school. The two of them entering a motel on the outskirts of town, then leaving separately 45 minutes later. "They meet every Tuesday and Thursday after school," Vincent continued. "Always the same motel, always room 237. Kyle pays cash, registers under the name John Morrison. Not exactly criminal mastermind level thinking." Mike studied the photos with clinical detachment. Seeing the evidence of Linda's betrayal didn't hurt anymore. It was simply data to be processed and utilized. "What about Patricia Phillips?" Vincent's expression darkened. "That woman is a piece of work. She's been actively facilitating this affair for months. I followed her yesterday to a real estate office downtown. Turns out she's been house hunting for Kyle, and she put down the deposit on a place about 10 minutes from your house. She's financing Kyle's life here. Gets better. I managed to get a look at some financial records. Your mother-in-law has been transferring money to Kyle for the past 4 months. $5,000 here, $3,000 there. She's essentially paying him to steal your wife. Mike felt something cold and satisfied settle in his chest. Patricia Phillips wasn't just enabling Linda's affair. She was funding it. That level of financial involvement would be devastating in a divorce proceeding. I need copies of those financial records. Already handled. I've also got phone records showing regular communication between all 3 of them going back to August. Text messages, call logs, the whole thing. Vincent pulled out a second folder, thicker than the first. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your friend Kyle Morrison has some serious skeletons in his closet. Mike opened the folder to find a detailed background report that went far beyond anything he could have discovered on his own. Kyle's employment history was a trail of inappropriate relationships and ethical violations, each one carefully covered up by sympathetic administrators or wealthy connections. He's a predator, Vincent said bluntly. 3 different schools, 3 different inappropriate relationships with female colleagues. Each time, he managed to avoid formal charges through a combination of legal pressure and financial settlements. The documentation was damning. Sexual harassment complaints that had been mysteriously withdrawn. Financial irregularities that had been quietly resolved. A pattern of targeting vulnerable women, often those going through divorces or personal crises. Linda fits his victim profile perfectly, Mike realized. Married woman, feeling undervalued, susceptible to attention from someone who seems sophisticated and interested. Exactly. And here's the best part. His ex-wife in California is willing to talk. Turns out Kyle cleaned out their joint accounts before filing for divorce, then used hidden assets to avoid paying adequate support for their 2 children. Mike looked up sharply. Kyle has children, 2 kids he essentially abandoned. His ex-wife, Jennifer Morrison, has been trying to track him down for months because he's behind on child support. She had no idea he was in Millbrook until I contacted her. The implications were staggering. Kyle Morrison wasn't just an adulterer. He was a deadbeat father who'd fled across the country to avoid his responsibilities. And Linda, who was planning to abandon her own children, was involved with a man who'd already abandoned his. I want to talk to Jennifer Morrison. Already arranged. She's flying out here this weekend. She's very motivated to see Kyle held accountable for his obligations. Vincent reached into his jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I've also got some interesting audio from yesterday. Kyle and your mother-in-law had quite a conversation. He pressed play, and Mike heard Patricia's voice, clear and unmistakable. Linda needs to file for divorce before Christmas. Michael's getting suspicious, and I don't want him to have time to hide assets or turn the children against her. Kyle's response was equally damning. What about the custody issue? Linda doesn't really want the kids full-time, but if she doesn't ask for them, it'll look bad in court. We'll ask for joint custody, then gradually transition to him having them more often. Linda will be so much happier without the daily burden of motherhood. Mike stopped the recording. They're not just planning to break up my marriage. They're strategizing how to manipulate the legal system. It gets worse. I've got them on tape discussing your business assets, your property holdings, even speculation about whether you might have an accident at work that would provide life insurance money. The suggestion of potential violence didn't shock Mike as much as it might have a week ago. He was beginning to understand that he'd been married to a stranger, someone capable of depths of betrayal he'd never imagined possible. Vincent, I need you to document everything. Every meeting, every conversation, every financial transaction. I want evidence that will hold up in court and destroy them in the community. Already on it. But Mike, you need to be careful about your own behavior. If they suspect you know something, they might accelerate their timeline or take steps to protect themselves. Mike nodded. I can handle Linda and Patricia. What about Kyle? Vincent's smile was predatory. Leave Kyle Morrison to me. I've got some ideas that should keep him very busy for the next few weeks. As they left the diner, Vincent handed Mike a small device that looked like a keychain fob. GPS tracker, he explained. Plan on Linda's car. I want to know everywhere she goes and everyone she sees. That evening, Mike installed the tracker while Linda was inside helping the kids with homework. It was a simple task that took less than 30 seconds, but as he attached the device to the underside of her car, Mike felt like he was sealing his wife's fate. Back in the house, Linda was reading to David while Emma practiced piano. It was a scene of domestic tranquility that would have warmed Mike's heart just a week ago. Now, it felt like a performance being staged for his benefit. How was work today? He asked Linda, settling into his chair with a cup of coffee. The usual. Budget meetings, parent conferences, boring administrative stuff. It was a lie, of course. According to Vincent's surveillance, Linda had spent 2 hours at the motel with Kyle, then met with Patricia to plan their next moves. Kyle Morrison seems like an interesting addition to the staff, Mike said casually. How's he fitting in? Linda's grip tightened on David's storybook. Fine, I think. I don't really work with him that much. Another lie. They work together every day, often staying late to coordinate their affair. Maybe we should have him and Rebecca's family over for dinner sometime, Mike suggested. Get to know him better. I don't think that's necessary, Linda said quickly. He's still settling in, probably wants to keep work and personal life separate. Mike nodded understandingly. Of course, though I got the impression at your mother's that he might be interested in meeting people, starting fresh in a new town. Linda's face flushed slightly. I really wouldn't know about his personal life. Mike smiled and kissed the top of David's head. Well, if he ever needs anything, recommendations for local services, help with his car, that sort of thing, make sure he knows I'm happy to help. It was a subtle threat wrapped in neighborly concern, and Linda seemed to recognize it as such. She finished David's story quickly and sent both children upstairs to get ready for bed. Mike, she said once they were alone, is everything okay? You've seemed different since Thanksgiving. Different how? I don't know. More attentive, I guess. More interested in my work, my co-workers. Mike pulled her close, noting how she stiffened slightly at his touch. Can't a man take interest in his wife's career? I'm proud of what you do, Linda. I want to support you however I can. Linda searched his face, looking for signs of suspicion or anger. Mike kept his expression neutral, loving, slightly puzzled by her concern. I love you, he said, and was surprised to find that some part of him still meant it, or at least still loved the woman he'd thought she was. I love you too, Linda replied, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. That night, as Linda slept beside him, Mike lay awake staring at the ceiling and planning the final phase of his campaign. Vincent's intelligence gathering was providing him with more ammunition than he'd dared hope for, but intelligence was only valuable if you knew how to weaponize it effectively. Mike Romano had learned patience from years of careful mechanical work, but his patience was nearly exhausted. Soon, it would be time to show Linda, Kyle, and Patricia Phillips what happened when you betrayed the wrong man. The only question was whether to destroy them quickly or slowly. Mike was beginning to think that slow would be more satisfying. Chapter 6. The Trap. Jennifer Morrison arrived in Millbrook on a gray Saturday morning in early December, driving a battered Honda with California plates and carrying a file folder thick with legal documents. Mike met her at the same diner where he'd been meeting Vincent, but this time he chose a corner booth where they could speak privately without interruption. Jennifer was nothing like what Mike had expected. Where Kyle projected polished sophistication, his ex-wife was obviously struggling. Her clothes were clean but worn, her car had seen better days, and she carried herself with the weary determination of a woman who'd been fighting an uphill battle for too long. Mr. Romano, she said, shaking his hand with a firm grip. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Vincent explained that you've been affected by Kyle's presence in your community. You could say that, Mike replied. I understand he owes you a significant amount of money. Jennifer's laugh was bitter. Significant doesn't begin to cover it. Kyle hasn't paid a dime in child support since he left California 6 months ago. My kids are 10 and 12, and they keep asking when Daddy's going to visit or why he doesn't call anymore. She opened her folder and spread documents across the table. This is what Kyle Morrison really looks like when you strip away the charm and the lies. Mike studied the papers with growing amazement. court orders for child support that Kyle had ignored, bank records showing that he'd systematically emptied their joint accounts before filing for divorce, credit card statements revealing thousands of dollars spent on luxury items while his children's school fees went unpaid. He told the California court that he was unemployed and couldn't afford support payments, Jennifer continued. Meanwhile, he was spending money on a new wardrobe, expensive dinners, and first-class plane tickets. He even bought a Rolex 2 weeks before claiming he was broke. What about his new job here in Millbrook? I found out about it through a mutual friend who saw his LinkedIn profile. Kyle's making $75,000 a year as athletic director, plus benefits. More than enough to meet his obligations to our children. Mike photographed the documents with his phone, adding them to his growing file of evidence. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you to do something that might seem unusual. Are you willing to come to Millbrook High School on Monday morning and file a formal complaint about Kyle's failure to pay child support? Jennifer's eyes brightened. You mean confront him publicly? Better than that. I mean involve the school administration, the local police, and possibly the media. Kyle's been presenting himself as a responsible educator and community member. I think people should know the truth about how he treats his own children. What's in it for you? Mike considered how much to reveal. Kyle Morrison is involved with my wife. I have reason to believe he's using the same pattern of manipulation and financial exploitation that he used with you. I want to stop him before he destroys another family. Jennifer's expression hardened. That bastard. How long has this been going on? Several months, possibly longer. My wife is planning to leave me and our children to be with Kyle. She doesn't know about his history or his outstanding obligations. Then she's about to get a very rude awakening. Jennifer gathered her documents and stood up. Mr. Romano, I'll do whatever it takes to make Kyle face his responsibilities. But I want more than just child support. I want him to face consequences for abandoning his children. Mike smiled for the first time in days. I think that can be arranged. Monday morning brought the first phase of Mike's counterattack. While Linda was getting ready for work, Mike made a phone call to Millbrook High School's main office. This is Michael Romano, he told the secretary. I'd like to speak with Principal Harrison about a personnel matter involving Kyle Morrison. Linda, who was applying makeup in their bedroom, froze at the mention of Kyle's name. What kind of personnel matter? The secretary asked. I have information about Mr. Morrison's background that the school should be aware of. It concerns his professional conduct and financial obligations. Mike could hear Linda moving closer to the bedroom door, trying to listen to his conversation. I'll schedule you an appointment for this afternoon, the secretary said. Would 2 o'clock work? Perfect. And please let Principal Harrison know that there may be other parties who want to provide information about Mr. Morrison as well. After hanging up, Mike found Linda standing in the hallway, her face pale with barely controlled panic. What was that about? She asked, trying to sound casual. Just some concerns about the new athletic director, Mike replied. Nothing that should affect you directly. Linda's hands were actually shaking as she gathered her purse and car keys. Mike, you can't just make accusations against people without evidence. Who said anything about accusations? I'm just sharing information that I think the school should have. Mike kissed her forehead, noting how she flinched at his touch. Have a good day at work, honey. I'm sure it'll be interesting. At exactly 9 o'clock, as students were settling into their first period classes, Jennifer Morrison walked into Millbrook High School's main office carrying a briefcase and wearing her most professional outfit. I'm here to see Kyle Morrison, she told the secretary. I'm his ex-wife, and I need to discuss some urgent matters regarding our children. The secretary, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson who'd worked at the school for 20 years, immediately recognized the potential for drama. Is Mr. Morrison expecting you? No, but he'll want to see me. Trust me. Mrs. Patterson hesitated, then picked up her phone. Mr. Morrison? There's someone here to see you. You're your ex-wife. Even from across the office, Jennifer could hear Kyle's sharp intake of breath through the phone speaker. Tell her I'm busy. Kyle's voice was tight with panic. I'm afraid that's not an option, Jennifer said, loudly enough for Kyle to hear. I have legal documents that need to be served, and I can do it here in the office or in front of his students. His choice. 5 minutes later, Kyle Morrison appeared in the main office looking like a man walking to his execution. He'd obviously tried to compose himself, but Jennifer could see the fear in his eyes. "Jennifer," he said, attempting his usual charm. "What a surprise. What brings you to $18,000 in unpaid child support?" Jennifer interrupted, her voice carrying clearly across the office. "Plus interest and penalties." Mrs. Patterson pretended to be busy with paperwork, but Jennifer could see her listening intently. By lunchtime, the entire school would know that the new athletic director was a deadbeat father. "Can we discuss this privately?" Kyle asked through gritted teeth. "We can discuss it right here. You've been avoiding my calls, ignoring court orders, and lying about your financial situation. Our children haven't heard from you in 6 months." Kyle's face flushed red. "I told you, I'm between jobs. I can't." "You're making $75,000 a year," Jennifer said, pulling out a copy of his employment contract. "I have documentation of your salary, your benefits, and your living expenses. You can afford to support your children. You just choose not to." At that moment, Principal Harrison emerged from his office, drawn by the raised voices. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone professional but concerned. Jennifer turned to face him. "Are you Principal Harrison? I'm Jennifer Morrison, Kyle's ex-wife. I think you should know that your athletic director has been in violation of court-ordered child support for the past 6 months." Principal Harrison's expression grew serious. "Mr. Morrison, is this true?" Kyle opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stood there like a fish gasping for air while his carefully constructed new life began to crumble around him. "I have all the documentation," Jennifer continued, addressing Principal Harrison. "Court orders, payment records, employment verification. Kyle has been systematically avoiding his obligations to his children while living a comfortable lifestyle here in Millbrook." "My office," Principal Harrison said quietly. "All of us." Now, as they walked toward the principal's office, Kyle shot Jennifer a look of pure hatred. But she was beyond caring about Kyle's feelings. She'd spent months worried about paying rent and buying groceries while he was playing house with another man's wife. At 2 o'clock, Mike arrived for his appointment with Principal Harrison. The secretary, who'd obviously had an eventful morning, greeted him with knowing sympathy. "Mr. Romano, Principal Harrison is ready to see you. And I think you should know, it's been quite a day regarding Mr. Morrison." Principal Harrison was a thoughtful man in his 50s who dedicated his career to education and took the responsibility of hiring quality staff seriously. When Mike entered his office, Harrison looked like someone who'd just discovered a major problem. "Mr. Romano, thank you for coming in. I understand you have concerns about Kyle Morrison." "Linda, these photographs were provided by a private investigator. They appear to show you and Kyle Morrison in compromising situations over a period of several months." Linda stared at the photos in horror. Someone had been watching them, documenting their affair, building a case against them. The only question was who. I need to speak with a lawyer," she whispered. At noon, Mike Romano received a phone call from his wife. "Mike, I need to come home. There's been an emergency at school, and I need to talk to you." "Of course," Mike said. "I'll be here." Linda arrived home 20 minutes later, looking like a woman in shock. Mike was waiting in the living room with a cup of coffee and an expression of concerned confusion. "What happened?" he asked. Linda sat down heavily on the couch, her hands shaking. "Mike, there are some things I need to tell you. Things I should have told you a long time ago." "Okay," Mike said gently. "I'm listening." Linda took a shuddering breath. I've made some terrible mistakes. I've been seeing someone else, and now everything is falling apart." Mike let the confession hang in the air for a moment, then moved to sit beside her. "Linda, how long has this been going on?" "Since August. His name is Kyle Morrison. He's the new athletic director at school. I know this is devastating, and I know you have every right to hate me, but I need you to know that I never meant for it to get this far." Mike took her hands in his, noting how she flinched at his touch. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, Linda confessed to the affair with Kyle, though she carefully omitted her mother's involvement and her plans to leave him. She painted herself as a woman who'd been swept away by unexpected attraction, someone who'd made terrible choices, but who genuinely regretted them. "I want to end it," she said through tears. "I want to fix our marriage, Mike. Can you forgive me?" Mike studied his wife's face, seeing the calculation behind her apparent remorse. Linda wasn't confessing because she felt guilty. She was confessing because she'd been caught and was trying to minimize the damage. Linda, forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight. This is going to take time to work through. I know. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, whatever you think we need. Mike nodded thoughtfully. What about Kyle? How does he feel about you ending the relationship? Linda's expression tightened. Kyle has his own problems to deal with. He lied to me about his past, about his children, about his financial situation. I realize now that I didn't really know him at all. His children. He has 2 kids in California that he abandoned. He owes thousands in child support. Everything he told me was a lie. Mike felt a surge of satisfaction. Linda was discovering what it felt like to be betrayed, to realize that someone you trusted had been lying to you for months. That must be very difficult, he said sympathetically. Mike, I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Our children need their family intact. Can we at least try to save our marriage? Mike looked into Linda's eyes and saw desperation, fear, and calculation. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was negotiating for survival. We could try, he said finally. But Linda, there have to be conditions. Complete honesty from now on. No more contact with Kyle Morrison. Full transparency about your activities and communications. Linda nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need. And Linda, I'm going to need you to sign some documents acknowledging the affair and agreeing to the conditions I mentioned. For our own protection, in case we need couples therapy or legal guidance. Linda hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Of course. Mike pulled her close, feeling her body tense in his arms. We'll get through this, he whispered. Our family is stronger than one mistake. But as he held his lying wife and made promises about forgiveness and second chances, Mike Romano was already planning the final phase of his revenge. Because Mike Romano had never forgiven a betrayal in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. Chapter 8. The Destruction. The document Linda signed that evening was carefully crafted by Benjamin Cross to be much more than a simple acknowledgement of infidelity. Hidden within the legal language of what appeared to be a marital reconciliation agreement were clauses that would give Mike significant advantages in any future divorce proceedings. Linda, eager to salvage what she could from her crumbling situation, signed without reading the fine print. She was focused on damage control, unaware that Mike was orchestrating her complete downfall. Thursday morning brought devastating news for Kyle Morrison. Principal Harrison called him into the office to announce that the school board had voted to place him on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation into his conduct. Kyle, effective immediately, you're barred from school property and prohibited from contacting students or faculty members, Harrison said, handing him a formal letter. Your access credentials have been deactivated, and security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Kyle's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. This is insane. You can't destroy my career based on rumors and accusations. The accusations include documented evidence of professional misconduct and failure to disclose material information during the hiring process, Harrison replied coldly. Your ex-wife's claims about unpaid child support have been verified, and we have photographic evidence of inappropriate relationships with faculty members. Kyle's face went white. What photographs? Harrison opened a file and showed Kyle several pictures that Vincent had captured over the past weeks. Kyle and Linda in intimate conversations. Kyle's hand on Linda's back, the two of them entering the motel together. These were provided by a private investigator hired by your ex-wife's attorney, Harrison said. They clearly show violation of district policies regarding professional conduct. Kyle stared at the photos in horror. His new life, his fresh start, his escape from the consequences of his past, all of it was evaporating before his eyes. I need to call my lawyer, he said weakly. That's your right. But Kyle, I should warn you that this investigation is likely to result in termination and potentially criminal charges. The district takes misconduct very seriously. Meanwhile, Linda was having her own crisis at school. Word of Kyle's suspension had spread through the faculty like wildfire, and everyone knew about their affair. Colleagues who'd been friendly just days before now avoided eye contact or whispered when she passed. At lunchtime, Linda received a phone call from her mother. "Linda, we need to talk immediately." Patricia's voice was sharp with panic. "There are people asking questions about money I gave to Kyle. I think someone is investigating our financial arrangements." "What financial arrangements?" Linda asked, though she knew exactly what her mother meant. "I do. But first, let me ask, has anything unusual happened today regarding Mr. Morrison?" Harrison's expression was grim. His ex-wife showed up this morning with evidence that he's been violating court orders for child support. "It's concerning." Mike nodded sympathetically. "That aligns with some of the information I've uncovered." "Principal Harrison, I believe Kyle Morrison has been misrepresenting himself to this school and to our community." Mike spread his own documentation across Harrison's desk. Financial records showing Kyle's debt problems. Employment records revealing the pattern of inappropriate relationships. Character references from California that painted a very different picture than Kyle's polished resume. "Good God," Harrison muttered as he reviewed the documents. "How did this get past our background check?" "Kyle's very good at presenting himself in the best possible light," Mike replied. "But his track record speaks for itself. And I'm afraid there may be additional issues developing right here in Millbrook." Harrison looked up sharply. "What kind of issues?" Mike hesitated, as if reluctant to speak. "I've heard rumors about inappropriate relationships with faculty members. Nothing concrete, you understand, but given his history. Do you have any evidence of current misconduct?" "Not yet. But Principal Harrison, patterns tend to repeat themselves. Kyle Morrison has left a trail of damaged relationships and financial irresponsibility everywhere he's been. I don't think Millbrook High School should be his next victim." Harrison leaned back in his chair, clearly troubled. "Mr. Romano, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I'm going to need to conduct a thorough review of Mr. Morrison's employment and behavior since he started here." "Of course. And Principal Harrison, if you need any additional information or documentation, please don't hesitate to call me." As Mike left the school, he felt a deep satisfaction settling in his chest. Kyle Morrison's carefully constructed new life was beginning to unravel, and this was just the beginning. Phase 1 of the trap was complete. Kyle was now under official scrutiny, his ex-wife was pursuing him for child support, and his reputation in the community was starting to crack. But Mike Romano was just getting started. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The first crack in Linda's composure appeared Tuesday evening, when she came home from work looking like she'd aged 5 years in one day. Mike was in the kitchen helping Emma with her math homework while David built an elaborate Lego construction on the dining room table. "How was your day?" Mike asked with genuine curiosity. Linda dropped her purse on the counter with more force than necessary. "There were some administrative issues at school. Nothing important." Mike nodded sympathetically while Emma worked through a particularly challenging problem. "These things happen. I'm sure whatever it is will work itself out." Linda's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and Mike saw her face go pale. "I need to make a phone call," she said, heading toward their bedroom. Mike waited until he heard the bedroom door close, then quietly followed. Linda's voice was barely audible through the door, but her distress was unmistakable. "He knows something, Kyle. Principal Harrison spent 2 hours asking questions about you today. And your ex-wife. Why didn't you tell me about your ex-wife?" Mike couldn't hear Kyle's response, but Linda's next words were crystal clear. $18,000? You owe $18,000 in child support? How could you not mention that you have children?" There was a long pause. Then Linda's voice rose to an angry whisper. "Don't you dare blame me for this. You said you were divorced with no complications. You said you were starting fresh. This is exactly the kind of thing that could destroy everything we've worked for." Mike smiled grimly. Linda was beginning to understand that Kyle Morrison wasn't the prize she'd thought he was. But she had no idea how much worse things were about to get. Wednesday brought phase 2 of Mike's plan into action. Vincent had spent the previous evening strategically placing evidence where it would be discovered by the right people at the right time. At 8 in the morning, an anonymous tip reached the state education department reporting possible ethics violations by Kyle Morrison. The tipster claimed to have evidence of an inappropriate relationship between the athletic director and a married faculty member. At 9 o'clock, Patricia Phillips received a phone call at her home from a woman claiming to be a private investigator working for Kyle's ex-wife. Mrs. Phillips, I understand you've been providing financial assistance to Kyle Morrison. I'm calling to inform you that this money may be subject to garnishment for unpaid child support. I don't know what you're talking about, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Ma'am, we have bank records showing transfers from your account to Kyle Morrison's account totaling over $20,000. That money belongs to his children, and my client intends to recover it. At 10 o'clock, Kyle Morrison was called into Principal Harrison's office for a formal interview. Harrison had spent the previous evening reviewing Kyle's personnel file and making phone calls to references in California. Kyle, I'm going to ask you some direct questions, and I need honest answers, Harrison said. Are you currently involved in a personal relationship with any member of the faculty or staff? Kyle's hands clenched in his lap. I don't think my personal life is relevant to my job performance. That's not what I asked. Are you currently involved in a personal relationship with any member of this school's faculty or staff? The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Kyle finally answered. I've developed friendships with several colleagues. Friendships or something more intimate? Kyle's lawyer instincts kicked in. I'm not comfortable discussing my private relationships without legal representation. Harrison leaned forward. Kyle, you're not under arrest, but your employment here requires adherence to professional standards and district policies. If you're unable to answer basic questions about your conduct, I'll have to assume you have something to hide. At 11 o'clock, Linda Romano was called into Harrison's office. She'd been dreading this moment since Tuesday, but she'd hoped Kyle would handle the situation before it reached her. Linda, thank you for coming in. I need to ask you about your relationship with Kyle Morrison. Linda's mouth felt dry as cotton. He's a colleague. We work together on various administrative projects. Has your relationship with Mr. Morrison ever extended beyond professional collaboration? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Linda knew that Harrison wouldn't be asking unless he already suspected the truth, but admitting to the affair would destroy her career, her marriage, and her children's lives. I don't know what you're implying, she said carefully. Harrison opened a folder on his desk and removed several photographs. Linda's heart stopped as she recognized herself and Kyle at Romano's restaurant, in the school parking lot, entering and leaving the motel. Don't play innocent with me. The money I've been giving Kyle to help him get established, there are lawyers saying it can be seized for child support. I could lose everything I've invested in getting you away from Michael. Linda felt the last of her carefully constructed plans collapsing. Mother, I told Mike about the affair. I'm trying to save my marriage. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. You did what? Patricia's voice was ice cold. Kyle lied to me about everything. He has children he abandoned, debts he's been hiding. The whole relationship was based on lies. So you're just giving up? Throwing away months of careful planning to go crawling back to your grease monkey husband? Mike has offered me a second chance. That's more than I deserve after what I've done. Patricia's laugh was bitter. You stupid girl. Don't you understand that Michael already knows everything? Nobody just forgives adultery like this. He's planning something, and you're walking right into his trap. Friday afternoon brought the final blow to Kyle Morrison's rapidly disintegrating life. Jennifer Morrison, accompanied by a local sheriff's deputy, arrived at Kyle's apartment with a court order for asset seizure. Kyle Morrison, you're under arrest for willful violation of court-ordered child support, the deputy announced as Kyle opened his door. Kyle's neighbors gathered on their porches and balconies to watch as he was handcuffed and led to a patrol car. His expensive clothes, his polished image, his carefully crafted persona, none of it mattered anymore. He was just another deadbeat dad being arrested for abandoning his children. Jennifer watched with grim satisfaction as deputies carried boxes of Kyle's possessions out of his apartment. The Rolex he'd bought while claiming poverty, the designer suits he'd worn to seduce other men's wives, the expensive electronics he'd purchased with money that should have gone to his children, all of it would be sold to pay his debts. Your children will finally get the support they deserve, Jennifer told Kyle as he sat in the back of the patrol car. And every woman in this town will know exactly what kind of man you really are. That evening, Mike made his final move. He arranged for Linda to come home to an empty house. He'd taken Emma and David to his sister's house for a sleepover and waited for her in their living room. "Mike, where are the kids?" Linda called as she entered the house. "They're safe," Mike replied from the darkened living room. "We need to talk." Linda found him sitting in his chair, a manila folder in his lap, and an expression she'd never seen before on his face. "Sit down, Linda." Something in his tone made her freeze. This wasn't the understanding, forgiving husband who'd held her just days before. This was someone else entirely. "Mike, what's wrong?" "Sit down." Linda sat on the couch, her hands trembling slightly. Mike opened the folder and began laying photographs on the coffee table between them. Pictures of Linda and Kyle at restaurants, at the motel, an intimate conversation at school. Then came the documents. Financial records showing Patricia's payments to Kyle, phone records documenting months of communication, hotel receipts, credit card statements. "I know everything, Linda. Every lie, every secret meeting, every plan you and your mother made to destroy our marriage." Linda stared at the evidence in horror. "Mike, I told you about the affair. I confessed everything. You confessed to a fraction of the truth. You didn't tell me about your mother's involvement. You didn't tell me about the house she bought for Kyle. You didn't tell me about your plan to abandon our children and start a new life." Mike pulled out his phone and played a recording. Linda heard her own voice clearly. "They'll adjust. Children are resilient. And honestly, they spend more time at Mike's garage than they do with me anyway. Maybe it's better if he has primary custody." Linda's face went white. "Where did you get that?" "I have recordings of all your conversations with Kyle and your mother. I have financial records showing how Patricia funded your affair. I have evidence that would destroy you in any divorce proceeding." Linda started to cry, but Mike felt no sympathy for her tears. "Mike, please. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Our children need their mother. Our children deserve better than a mother who is willing to abandon them for a man who abandons his own children." Mike's voice was completely calm. "Linda, you made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. What do you want from me?" Mike pulled out a set of legal documents. "You're going to sign these papers agreeing to an uncontested divorce. I get full custody of Emma and David, along with the house and primary ownership of my businesses. You get visitation rights and enough money to start over somewhere else. And if I refuse?" Mike's smile was cold. "Then I release all of this evidence to the court, to your school district, to the local newspaper, and to anyone else who might find it interesting. Your career will be over, your reputation will be destroyed, and you'll still lose custody of the children because no judge will award them to a woman who planned to abandon them." Linda stared at the documents through her tears. "This isn't forgiveness. This isn't giving our marriage a second chance." "No," Mike agreed. "This is justice. You betrayed our marriage, our children, and our family. Kyle betrayed his children and his ex-wife. Your mother betrayed any trust one might have had in her. None of you deserve forgiveness." Mike stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where they'd planned to raise their children together. "Kyle's in jail, Linda. His career is over, his reputation is destroyed, and he'll be paying child support for the next decade. Your mother is facing legal action from his ex-wife's attorneys. And you get to choose between signing these papers or facing the consequences of having everything made public." Linda picked up the pen with shaking hands. "What about Emma and David? How will you explain this to them?" "I'll tell them that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love. I'll tell them that actions have consequences and that their mother chose to leave rather than face the consequences of her actions." Mike turned back to face his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, as she signed away her rights to their children and their life together. "You can stay here tonight," he said quietly, "but I want you gone by tomorrow evening. Emma and David will be told that Mommy needs to go away for a while to figure some things out." Linda finished signing the papers and looked up at Mike with a mixture of hatred and despair. "You planned all of this," she said. "You never intended to forgive me." "I plan to protect my children from people who would hurt them," Mike replied. "That includes their mother, if necessary." As Linda left the house that night to stay at her mother's, Mike Romano sat alone in his living room and felt a deep satisfaction settle over him. Michael Romano had never forgiven a betrayal in his life, and he'd kept that promise tonight. Chapter 9. The Resolution. 6 months later, Millbrook had returned to its usual quiet rhythm, though the Romano family had become something of a local legend. Mike had been discreet about the details of his divorce, but enough information had leaked through legal proceedings and gossip networks that most people understood the broad outlines of what had happened. Kyle Morrison had been convicted of willful violation of child support orders and sentenced to 6 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. His teaching credentials had been permanently revoked, and he'd been forced to work a series of menial jobs to pay his mounting debts. The last anyone had heard, he was washing dishes at a restaurant 2 counties away, living in a studio apartment, and sending most of his paycheck to California. Patricia Phillips had been forced to sell her family home to cover legal fees and the money she'd loaned to Kyle that was seized for child support. She'd moved to a small apartment across town and rarely ventured out in public, unable to face the shame of having orchestrated her daughter's affair only to see it destroy everyone involved. Linda Romano had taken a teaching position in another state, far from Millbrook and the ruins of her former life. She sent birthday cards to Emma and David and called them once a week, but the children had adapted to her absence with a resilience that Mike had counted on. Mike himself had become something of a local celebrity. Parents brought their teenage children to his shop for stern lectures about the importance of integrity and keeping promises. Business had actually increased as people sought him out, drawn by his reputation as a man who stood by his principles no matter the cost. On a warm Saturday evening in late spring, Mike was in his garage working on a 1967 Mustang, while Emma and David played in the yard. The peaceful domesticity of the scene was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into his driveway. Mike looked up to see Detective Rita Vasquez getting out of her personal car. She was off-duty, dressed in jeans and a casual shirt, but her expression was serious. "Evening, Rita," Mike said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "What brings you by?" "Mike, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Mike set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "Of course." The investigation into Kyle Morrison's background, the timing of everything that happened to him and Linda, it all fell into place a little too neatly. Professional investigators, private detectives, evidence appearing exactly when it would do the most damage. Mike nodded slowly. "It was quite a coincidence." "Mike, I've been a cop for 15 years. I don't believe in coincidences like that." Rita stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Did you orchestrate the whole thing?" Mike was quiet for a long moment, considering his response. "Rita, let me ask you a question. If someone betrayed your trust, hurt your children, and planned to destroy your family, what would you do?" "I'd want justice," Rita replied without hesitation. "So would I. The question is whether you wait for the system to deliver justice, or whether you take steps to ensure that justice actually happens." Rita studied his face. "That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I can give you." Mike picked up his wrench and returned to work on the Mustang. Kyle Morrison abandoned his children and seduced another man's wife. Linda Romano planned to abandon her children for a man who'd already proven he abandons children. Patricia Phillips funded an affair designed to destroy a marriage and family. Mike looked up at Rita. They all face consequences for their choices. Whether those consequences came about naturally or with some assistance, I couldn't say. Rita was quiet for several minutes, watching Mike work. "Off the record," she finally said, "I'm glad things worked out the way they did. Those kids of yours are better off without people like that in their lives." "I think so too." Rita started to leave, then turned back. "Mike, whatever did or didn't happen, I hope you know that some lines can't be uncrossed. If you ever did orchestrate something like this, make sure it was worth it." Mike set down his tools and looked at Emma and David, who were chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. His children were happy, healthy, and safe. They lived in a home filled with honesty and integrity. They would grow up understanding that actions have consequences and that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. "It was worth it," he said quietly. After Rita left, Mike finished his work on the Mustang and called the children inside for baths and bedtime stories. As he tucked Emma into bed, she asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Daddy, Is Mommy ever coming home? Mike sat on the edge of her bed and chose his words carefully. Mommy made some choices that hurt our family, sweetheart. Sometimes when people make bad choices, they have to face consequences. Mommy chose to leave rather than face those consequences. But she still loves us, right? In her own way, yes. But love isn't just about feelings, Emma. Love is about making good choices, keeping promises, and putting the people you love first. Mommy couldn't do those things. Emma nodded solemnly. Will you ever leave us, Daddy? Never, Mike said firmly. I will always choose our family first. That's a promise I'll never break. Later that evening, after both children were asleep, Mike sat on his back porch with a beer and reflected on the past year. He'd lost a wife, but he'd saved his children from growing up in a home built on lies and betrayal. He destroyed 3 people who'd tried to destroy him, but he felt no guilt about their fates. Patricia Phillips had taught him that some people would go to extraordinary lengths to get what they wanted, regardless of who got hurt in the process. Kyle Morrison had shown him that some people were fundamentally selfish, willing to abandon their own children for personal comfort. Linda had proven that even the people you trust most can betray you completely. But Mike Romano had shown all of them something more important, that actions have consequences, that betrayal carries a price, and that some men will go to any length to protect what matters most to them. As fireflies danced in his yard and his children slept safely in their beds, Mike Romano felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that he'd kept his most important promise.